The Sun King Louis XIV's reign is often remembered as a time of great extravagance and opulence in French history. After taking power in 1643, he became one of the most powerful monarchs in European history, leaving a lasting legacy of cultural and political achievements. However, his reign was also marked by lavish spending and a culture of excess, epitomized by the Grand Palace of Versailles as well as numerous military conquests. Despite the appearance of luxury, Louis's reign was plagued by financial and economic mismanagement, which left the country completely bankrupt. By the end of his reign, the national debt had risen to record levels, culminating in multiple sovereign defaults. The French economy never fully recovered from the poor financial position Louis XIV left it in, and many historians point to this as a major factor in the eventual collapse of the monarchy in 1789. While Louis XIV gets most of the blame for bankrupting France, his Minister of Finance, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, deserves some of the credit as well. Despite his efforts to promote economic growth and increase France's power, Colbert's management of the royal finances often resulted in significant waste and extravagance, leaving a lasting impact on France's economy and political landscape. In this video, we'll explore the reign of Louis XIV, the extravagance of the Palace of Versailles, and the role of Jean-Baptiste Colbert in the king's financial mismanagement. At the age of 5, Louis XIV succeeded his father, Louis XIII, as the King of France. He was raised at a time of civil conflicts in France between 1648 and 1653, also known as the Fronde, and this took place in the midst of the Franco-Spanish War. The disastrous state of French society during this time had a lasting impact on the future king, convincing him that a strong monarchy with absolute power was the only thing that could keep the country under control. Louis technically became king in 1643 at almost 5 years old, but he wasn't able to take full control until he turned 23 in 1661. Upon assuming full power, he almost immediately started a massive campaign to centralize power and reaffirm the supremacy of the monarchy. Spearheading the economic side of his reforms was his finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colbert was fully on board with Louis's philosophy of centralizing power and strengthening the French state. Colbert believed that France needed to put forth a total commitment to surpass its rivals, particularly the Netherlands and England. French manufacturers and merchants were closely regulated to prevent what Colbert viewed as needless rivalry and to guarantee that their products were of the finest quality. Colbert made an effort to encourage the expansion of domestic production in order to offset the need for France to import products from abroad, notably expensive luxury goods. His mercantilist strategies hindered imports by imposing high tariffs on them, and he attempted to create export companies whose overseas sales would increase the amount of money flowing into the kingdom. Colbert relied on two main policies to achieve these goals. Firstly, he implemented protectionist trade policies to boost domestic production. And secondly, he reformed tax collection policies to raise money for the ever-expanding government budget. One of Colbert's key policies was the use of tariffs to protect French industries from foreign competition. He implemented high tariffs on imported goods, particularly luxury goods, to encourage domestic production and reduce the outflow of gold and silver. Colbert believed that by protecting French industry, the country could become more self-sufficient and reduce its dependence on foreign goods. But the motivations were not purely economic. Colbert believed that developing luxury industries, including silk production, lace-making, and tapestry weaving, would increase France's prestige on the international stage, which was a key priority of King Louis. Colbert actively recruited foreign artisans from neighboring countries, including Italy and the Netherlands, to set up shop in France and bring their expertise to the French market. The problem was, France was not competitive with other European countries in the production of many luxury goods, and many of these new luxury enterprises were simply not economically viable. But Colbert wouldn't let the pesky issues of comparative advantage get in his way. He solved the problem of France's lack of international competitiveness by providing large subsidies to luxury goods producers. Subsidies for the luxury industry, however, weren't the only strains on the government budget during this time. In an effort to expand France's influence, King Louis embarked on multiple military conquests, including the Franco-Dutch War in the 1670s, the 9 Years' War, also known as the War of the League of Augsburg in the 1680s and 90s, and the War of Spanish Succession in the early 1700s. In addition to the human tragedy of war, they also cost money, and a lot of it. Add on top of that the construction of the Palace of Versailles, which was one of the most expensive construction projects in history, and it's easy to see how the government's treasury got a bit stretched. And it was Colbert's job to fund all of this expenditure. As finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert famously declared that the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest possible amount of feathers with the smallest possible amount of hissing. And he certainly plucked a few feathers. Prior to his appointment, France had a somewhat decentralized tax system, where local tax collectors would collect their taxes and hand this revenue over to the central government. The problem? This system was prone to corruption. As taxes made their way from the local to the central level, there could be dozens of tax collectors who would each skim a little bit of money without anyone noticing. Also, bribery was common, with many wealthy individuals paying off their local tax collector to avoid paying their taxes in full. So even while tax rates were relatively high, the government still struggled to fund its budget. To combat this, Colbert abolished the existing system of decentralized tax collection and replaced it with a new professional corps of tax collectors. Colbert believed that greed is part of human nature. By his judgment, the only way to prevent tax collectors from skimming funds was to compensate them handsomely. So the new professional tax collectors were paid a commission based on the revenue they collected. This provided strong incentive to collect as much in taxes as possible. Colbert also set quotas for how much each collector was required to bring in, and if a collector failed to meet their quota, he would be personally responsible for coming up with the shortfall himself. This did lead to abuses, with collectors charging more taxes than they were legally allowed to in many cases, but these abuses benefited the government's revenue position. And while Colbert's tax collection policies might more closely resemble a mafia operation than a legitimate taxation system, they were effective at increasing government revenue. Colbert's policies did succeed in boosting domestic luxury goods industries and raising government tax receipts. But his protectionist policies also led to unintended economic consequences. The high tariffs on imported foreign goods increased prices across the economy, and this, in addition to higher tax burdens, put an increasing strain on the finances of regular citizens. Also, the luxury goods industries were economically inefficient. Because they were protected from foreign competition and propped up by subsidies, they didn't have the motivation to innovate or increase efficiency. The complicated system of government subsidies also became notoriously corrupt, with well-connected noblemen paying bribes to get preferential allocations. At the same time, Louis's wars and the construction of the Palace of Versailles cost far more than expected. The government was forced to issue increasing numbers of bonds to pay the bills, despite the higher tax revenues. When Louis took power in 1661, the national debt was estimated at 80 million livres, which was the French currency at the time. By the end of his reign, this had increased to an estimated 3 billion livres, which was 20 times the annual tax revenue. The government's precarious financial situation eventually led to extreme economic hardship for the people. In 1709, a severe winter caused a crop failure. With payments accruing interest and the ongoing costs of France's involvement in the War of Spanish Succession, the country had no means to import enough food for the civilian population, which led to widespread famine. At this point, the bubble finally burst, and France declared a partial default on its sovereign debt. This caused investors to lose confidence in France, making it far more difficult and expensive for the nation to borrow money going forward. The war finally ended in 1713, due to disagreements among France's enemies and improved success on the battlefield. Philip V of the Bourbons, who was still King of Spain, renounced his claim to the French throne and allowed France to keep the land that it had taken under Louis's rule. While the French army could defeat the Spanish on the battlefield, they could not overcome the economic reality that France was completely broke. In 1715, right after Louis XIV's death, France defaulted on almost all of its government bonds, which destroyed what little confidence the world had left in the French monarchy. The French economy never fully recovered from these disastrous defaults. The taxation system implemented by Colbert was incredibly unpopular amongst everyone except the tax collectors. France continued its habit of getting involved in expensive wars with no real way to pay for them, especially by heavily subsidizing the American Revolution in the 1770s. This all contributed significantly to a period of economic and social upheaval in the 18th century, which ultimately led to the French Revolution in 1789, so ending France's once powerful position on the global stage.